Good morning. My name is Russell Keen. I serve Augusta University as the Executive Vice President for Administration and Chief of Staff to the President, and it is my honor to be here this morning to talk about ethics during our Values Week. I want to thank the individuals who've worked to put on our Values Week for this, and I'm honored to have been selected to deliver this message on ethics. Ethics is important. Glassdoor's Mission and Culture Survey in 2019 indicated that 77% of adults across the countries of the United States, the UK, France, and Germany would consider a company's culture before applying for a job there. 79% would consider a company's mission and purpose before applying there. Furthermore, over half of the 5,000 respondents said that a company's culture is more important than salary when it comes to job satisfaction. Interesting enough, culture means more to the younger generation and the millennials than it does to others. The survey found that in the U.S. and the UK, millennials are more likely to prioritize culture above salary. Plus, 73% of all adults surveyed would not apply to a company unless its values aligned with their own personal values. Whether an organization acts ethically is a significant factor in the average American's willingness to work for an employer. According to an independent research conducted by the Opinion Research Corporation, an overwhelming majority of employees surveyed, 94%, say it's critical or important that companies they work for are ethical. Ethics is such an important consideration, in fact, that 82% said they would prefer to be paid less to work for a company with ethical business practices than receive higher pay and work for a company who had none. The purpose of the research was to gain an understanding of the impact that corporate ethics and ethical health have on a company's or an organization's culture, how it has on the decisions and the actions of a company, the average American, and business success of companies as a result. Survey results are based on telephone interviews conducted in 2006 among a sample of full-time American workers age 18 and older. And they said more than half of U.S. workers, 56%, say their current company has an ethical culture. Yet one in four say that they've experienced unethical behavior in the past 6 months within their organization. These behaviors include witnessing a colleague acting unethically, illegally, or in a harassing or discriminatory manner, in receiving unethical emails on the job. 80% of ethics-related reasons for leaving a company are the result of a disagreement with the ethics of fellow workers, colleagues, supervisors, and management teams. 21% felt pressure to engage in illegal activity. 11% experienced unethical behavior in the job, and they said they were affected by it. Actions taken by those who were affected include talking about behavior with colleagues on the job, complete distraction on the job, talking with friends and family about the behavior they've witnessed, speaking with management, or making a formal complaint. Morals are often described as one's particular values concerning what is right or wrong. For example, it would go against my morals to help you falsify information to gain a competitive advantage. While ethics can refer broadly to moral principles, one often sees applied to questions of values and correct behavior within an organization. Dr. Merritt Wettelsborg runs her own business in a psychology practice with clients in the financial, pharmaceutical, and defense sectors. She holds a Ph.D. in business economics from Copenhagen Business School and an M.A. in psychology from the University of Copenhagen. She is the author of a book entitled Battle Mind: How to Navigate in Chaos and Perform Under Pressure. She recently wrote an article that I want to share with you. It was in the Harvard Business Review in April of 2019. The Psychology of Unethical Behavior. She starts off with describing a scenario that I'd like to share with each of you. On a warm evening, after a strategy session, off-site, A team of executives arrive at a well-known local restaurant. The group is looking forward to having dinner together, but the CEO is not happy about the table and demands a change. This isn't the one that my assistant usually reserves for me. A young waiter quickly finds the manager, who explains to the CEO there are no more tables available. The group tries to move on, but is once again interrupted by the CEO. Am I the only one annoyed by this view? Why is there construction happening today? He demands to know right now. The waiter tries to explain, but to no avail. You really need to up your game here, the CEO replied. The air is thick with tension. After the waiter walks away, someone makes a joke about the man's competence. This seems to please the CEO, who responds with his own derogatory quip. The group laughs. I want each of you to think about your ethics and your values. Now, if you were present at that dinner, what would you do? Would you let the CEO know that you disapprove of his language and behavior? Would you try to set a better example? Or would you stay silent? Dr. Wellsberg goes on to describe how this scene encapsulates three psychological dynamics in organizations across the country with respect to crossing ethical lines. The first dynamic she discusses is omnipotence. Omnipotence is when someone feels so aggrandized and entitled that they believe the rules of decent behavior do not apply to them. Omnipotence. The second dynamic is cultural numbness, when others play along and gradually begin to accept and even embody those deviant norms. And the third dynamic is justified neglect, when people don't speak up about ethical breaches because they are thinking more immediate rewards, such as staying on good footing with those who are in power. All it takes is the turning of a news channel, a search on the search engine for news, and it won't take you long to find stories of ethical lapses from individuals, corporations, foundations, and yes, even institutes of higher learning. Allegations of corruption, sexual harassment, privacy breaches, money laundering, racial discrimination, and much, much more. But the question is why? Why does this happen? I once heard my pastor ask the congregation, do you know how someone ends up in the desert all alone? And the response was one step at a time. I would take that a step further to say that each step toward a person or an organization's journey in the desert alone, there's a lack of focus, a lack of discipline, a lack of accountability. And each step along the way, there's more and more comfort toward that direction. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my observation that in many cases, in our personal lives, our work lives, comfort is the enemy. Each of us with our personal lives, our mental health, our physical health, our marriages, our relationships with our families and neighbors, with our work, our internal work, our external work, our relationships, comfort is the enemy. It is the comfort, lack of discipline to our values, and lack of accountability that individuals and organizations put their moral compasses in their proverbial pockets and go full steam ahead with complete disregard for the pitfalls that lie before them. Let's dig a little deeper on omnipotence, cultural numbness, and justified neglect as described by Dr. Wellsberg, so that we can possibly identify those dynamics in ourselves, our teams, and our organization should they arise. Omnipotence. Many moral lapses can be traced back to this feeling that you are invincible, untouchable, and hyper-capable, which can energize and create a sense of elation. The omnipotent leader rules in a way that the norms are meant for everyone else. The rules are meant for everyone else but them. Crossing a line feels less like a transgression and more like a rite of passage because of their position. They feel they have the right to skip or redraw the lines. Omnipotence is not all bad. Sometimes the rush you get from bold action is what's required to make breakthroughs or real progress. But the higher you climb on the ladder, the more it can become a liability. This is especially true if fewer and fewer of the people around you are willing and able to keep you grounded. If they're not able to keep you grounded and they're not willing to step up, omnipotence is a huge problem. If no one tells you no, you have a problem. One way to gauge whether you've reached peak omnipotence is if your decisions are met with only applause, deference, and silence. As leaders, how do we keep ourselves in check from falling toward omnipotence? The first is own your flaws. We've got to own our flaws. Remind yourself daily that you are not above it all, especially if you're in a leadership position. Assume you have weaknesses and think about them regularly. You should have close colleagues, friends, coaches, or mentors who dare to tell you the truth about your performance and your judgment. You should cultivate a similar group of trusted peers who will tell you the truth even when it is unpleasant. In addition, make sure that you encourage an obligation of dissent, an obligation to dissent among your core team. What I mean by that is if you're in a room and you make a decision and someone disagrees, or they think that there's some hurdles ahead, or maybe there's an ethical line that's you're on the border of crossing, you should cultivate a team with an obligation to dissent and talk about it. Cultural numbness. No matter how principled you are, you must recognize that over time, the bearings of your moral compass will shift toward the culture of your organization or team. People by nature want to fit in. We're taught to adapt in order to survive at a young age. In instances of competing values or personal ethics, psychologically, sometimes people make a trade-off between fitting in and staying true to their personal values. At first, cultural numbness can take shape when there's discrepancy between the ideals of your organization, the ideals they espouse, and what you see demonstrated and rewarded. Let me repeat that. Cultural numbness can take shape when there is a discrepancy between the ideals of your organization and what you see demonstrated and rewarded. But the mind needs resolution. So over time, you stop noticing offensive language. It becomes the norm to you. You stop noticing offensive behavior because it becomes the norm to you. In fact, you may even start to exhibit that behavior in ways that you would never have expected to be part of your repertoire. Dr. Wettelsberg indicates the cultural numbness is where the most severe breakdowns in ethical lapses in leadership occur. And why is that? It's because it's hard to detect. Leaders who have crossed the line never describe this as a clear choice on that path, but instead like wandering toward a desert where they lost track of what was right and what was wrong. They describe a process where they became numb to others' language and behavior, and then to their own. They're no longer objective, and their internal code of ethics is nothing more than meaningless repetitions of words. Their warning bells simply stopped ringing. As an organization, we cannot be numb or adapt to such behavior. We can't. When you reflect on your actions as a person, when you reflect on our actions as an organization, do you recognize yourself? Do you recognize this organization? Are we who we say we are? When you reflect, instead of smelling the garbage of foul behavior, disrespectful attitudes, or actions, do you become part of the landfill which will ultimately result in stifled productivity, turnover, dissension, and unhappiness? When this occurs, it's time for a gut check. Ask yourself, if you as a person, if your area of work, your team, if you or this organization were accused of being ethical and holding true to our values, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Would there be enough evidence to convict this university, this health system, our entire enterprise? What would be the verdict of a jury if we were all put on trial for being ethical and holding true to our values? Justified neglect. The human mind is skilled at justifying minor ethical infractions where there is a tangible reward at stake and when the risk of getting caught is low. Now, before we get too judgmental, how many of us, I want to ask for a show of hands, went over the speed limit this morning? The reward was getting to work earlier or getting your coffee earlier. The risk was low. All of us at some point will have to make a choice. And that choice is deciding between getting the reward or doing the right thing. The slippery slope starts right when you begin to rationalize actions and tell yourself, this is an exceptional situation, or we have to bend the rules to get things done. These initial steps become more routine. They become more comfortable, which then in turn creates habits that you know are bad, but which you start to feel excusable and even acceptable given the circumstances, and eventually become part of your moral fabric and the moral fabric of your organization. As Wedelberg so astutely stated, remember that power corrodes more than it corrupts, often as a result of clever justification of ethical neglect. So how do we combat this? You can combat this psychological dynamic by creating formal and social contracts that obligate both you and your colleagues to do right, rewarding ethical behavior and defining your shared boundaries. The latter could be simply making a list of things you will not do for profit or pleasure, keeping it in a convenient place to read regularly, and occasionally showing it to your team as a reminder. I'm very happy that we're using this week as an opportunity to discuss our ethics and our values. But the truth of the matter is this: if we're going to be serious about our values and serious about our ethics, we must hold ourselves accountable daily. This should be a daily discipline, a commitment that is honored and respected throughout our entire organization. A daily commitment. The reality is this: many of us will not have a mapped out plan or resource guide to direct us in every situation or every ethical dilemma. However, it's important in those circumstances that as an organization we create environments of trust. Trust so that these things can be discussed and resolved in a direct and meaningful way. It's not a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of moral deficiency to speak with someone about a dilemma you're having a difficult time navigating through. In fact, I would say that it's a sign of personal and organizational maturity when this occurs. Even though most organizations have some culture and structural checks and balances, value statements, guidelines, even whistleblower functions, leaders must also be mindful of the psychological conditions that push people, including themselves, to cross ethical lines. Understanding the dangers of omnipotence, numbness, and justified neglect are like installing the first few warning signs on a long road of our personal lives and our life as an organization. The success of our organization depends on you. It depends on your abilities. The first is your responsibility. Are you willing to be responsible and to be found faithful and fulfilling who you say you are? We should all be responsible to holding ourselves to a set of ethics that binds together our values. Ethics without values simply does not work. Our personal code of ethics and our collaborative code of ethics should show up in our values of collegiality, compassion, excellence, inclusivity, integrity, and leadership. The second ability that we need is your dependability. We depend on our leaders and our employees to maintain a model of discipline, a model that is a disciplined set of ethical principles that complement our shared values. When a leader exhibits behavior contrary to our values and ethics, they create a toxic environment of anxiety, disruption, deceit, and a total lack of trust. This can bring a person, a family, and certainly any organization down to its knees and set it back for decades. Dependability results in greater trust and opportunity. The third ability is your accountability. We should hold ourselves, our peers, our colleagues accountable to our values. When accountability exists, a culture of excellence permeates. When it doesn't, the organizational structure becomes fractured. Our success at Augusta University and AU Health System depends on each and every one of us to remember the call to be responsible, dependable, and accountable. I want to talk a little bit about leadership. After surveying thousands of people around the world and performing more than 400 written case studies, James Kouzes and Barry Posner identified those characteristics that are most desired in a leader. In virtually every single survey, honesty or integrity were identified more frequently than any other trait. And that makes sense, doesn't it? If people are going to follow someone, whether into battle or business or ministry, they want assurance that their leaders can be trusted. They want to know that he or she will keep their promises and fulfill their commitments. People want to know that their leaders can be trusted. Promises and commitments are significant. Though in many organizations today with Machiavellian ethics, it seems that fulfilling promises and commitments has become optional. In these type of organizations, leaders often seem more concerned with convenience and performance of giving lip service rather than to the character of their actions and their organizations. It's this idea that when things get tough or inconvenient, the rules can be changed and commitments and covenants can be discarded at will. I don't want to be affiliated with any organization that holds those ethics, and I know you don't either. In order for us to prevent this from happening here, or our homes, or our houses of worship, or civic groups, we need to maintain good ethical hygiene. And perhaps good words to think about ethical hygiene are discipline and consistency. There must be discipline to our core values and consistency between what we do on the inside and what we do on the outside. People and organizations can let us down again and again because there's often a discrepancy between what or who they claim to believe and how they actually live. So many of us have been burned by relationships, by people, by organizations going back on their word, claiming that they said something when they didn't say it, or claiming that they would do something when they didn't do it. It can make you cynical if you're not careful. Listen to this. Much of the personal heartaches and organizational brokenness that we experience is directly related to the unreliability of people to follow a code of ethics that mirrors the values they say they believe. Much of the personal heartaches and organizational brokenness we experience are directly related to the unreliability of people to follow a code of ethics that mirrors the values they say they believe. If you as a person, or us here, the big us, an institution of higher learning, an academic medical center, a health system, if we want to have integrity, we must choose not only to state our principles and values, but our daily values must match who we say we are. Our actions must match the values we say we hold dear. Anyone who wants to lead a team at least owes it to their prospective team members to let them know what they're getting into. No one respects a person who talks a good game but fails to play by the rules. What a leader does will have a greater impact on those he or she wishes to lead than what a leader says. A person, an employee, may forget 90% of what a leader says, but he or she will never forget how a leader acts. A hypocrite is both unqualified and unfit to guide others toward attaining higher character. In organization, I think it's important for each of us to self-reflect on our actions, the actions of our teams, and to have meaningful dialogue on how we're doing and how we can do better. On a personal level, we need to ask ourselves, how do we live when no one's looking? It's easy to look like a person of integrity when people are watching, but do I live it in my private life with the same level of consistency that I live it in my public life? So much of our lives are consumed what might be called image maintenance. We spend vast amounts of energy trying to get people to think about us in the way we want to be thought about. How many of us project positivity on social media when deep down inside we're actually going through something? John Ortberg suggests human interaction is largely an endless attempt to convince others that we are more assertive, that we are more clever, gentle, or successful than they might think if we'd otherwise not educated them. As individuals, it is possible to live one life publicly and another life privately. The same could be said for organizations. That's not integrity, and it's not healthy. As human beings, we will stumble from time to time. As organizations, it is my sincere hope that we apply principles of grace, understanding, and consistency with regard to our ethics, our values, and our mission. We will accomplish this much more effectively with everyone's commitment. Everyone. The story is told of a horse pull in Canada, where one horse pulled 9,000 pounds and one horse pulled 8,000. And together you would expect that they would pull 17,000 pounds, but that's not so. They pulled 30,000 pounds. It's the principle called synergism. The simultaneous action of separate agents working together has a greater total effect than the sum of their individual efforts. It takes all of us. I believe in our personal and our professional lives that consistently reaffirming and adhering to our values with our moral compasses in hand gives a level of self-fulfillment and organizational success that could otherwise never be achieved. I want Augusta University and AU Health System to be the best place to work in Georgia. If we hold ourselves to our ethics and our values, we can accomplish this goal. You matter. Your work matters. Your actions matter. In closing, I recently read a book entitled Chase the Lion by James Patterson. And I thought some of the points in his book are relevant to our ethics and our values. He challenges the readers to quit living as if the purpose of life were to arrive safely at death. He says, grab life by the mane, set God-sized goals. Instead of pointing out problems, be a part of the solution. Live like today is the first day and the last day of your life. Find every excuse that you can to celebrate everything. Don't let what is wrong with other people, what is wrong with organizations or circumstances keep you from doing what is right. Burn bridges of jealousy, mistrust, and deceitfulness, and build bridges of hope, trust, and patience. Don't try to be something you're not, but be everything and more of who you say you are and what you say you believe. Quit holding out, quit holding back, and quit running away. Run toward the roar and chase the lion. We are Augusta University, and we are AU Health System, and our values are collegiality, compassion, excellence, integrity, inclusivity, and leadership. Thank you for this opportunity, and hope you all have a great week.